Thank you so much for making the time to join us this evening. I know that you are all exceptionally busy people, so we really do appreciate it. It's great to have you here. So my name is Jess Wade and I'm the Chief Executive here at Carers of East Lothian, and I really am delighted to be able to welcome you to this event this evening. So I'm sure many of you will be aware of the specific and considerable challenges facing carers, particularly at the moment, but I do want to give just a bit of background just to set the scene. So in Scotland, 16% of the carer population said that they were providing unpaid care before coronavirus, and a further 9% have said they started caring since the pandemic began. So those of you who are exceptional in maths will know that that suggests around 1 in 4 adults in East Lothian today could be an unpaid carer, which is obviously a really sizable chunk of the population. So unpaid carers make a staggering contribution to our communities. They save the Scottish economy over £10 billion per year in the support that they provide to loved ones. Even before the pandemic, many carers felt exhausted and worn out, were struggling financially and experienced worse physical and mental health outcomes than the general population. And at Carers of East Lothian, we see that firsthand through carers coming to us for support every single day. So we know that this current situation is unsustainable for everyone. We know that our social care system would collapse without the continued contribution of unpaid carers, and they need and deserve our support. So at Carers of East Lothian, we're urging all political parties and whoever will be the next MSP for East Lothian to be a champion for unpaid carers. And for that reason, I'm absolutely delighted, as I said, to be able to welcome all the election candidates for this area to the event tonight, as well as all the carers and other participants who are here today. So I believe it's now time to ask people to introduce themselves. So candidates, I would like you now to introduce yourselves, your party and your area of your interest in or knowledge of carers issues, taking no more than 2 minutes each. So please, can we start with Paul McLennan?
Yeah, Jess, thank you for that, and many thanks for the invitation. My name's Paul McLennan. I'm the SNP candidate tonight. I've been a councillor for 14 years, was the previous cabinet spokesman for social care and health, and I've represented the SNP at Carers Hustings before and worked with and recognised a few faces from the audience tonight. This election's taking place in the most serious of times. The past year has probably been the most difficult and heartbreaking most of us will ever remember. How people vote on the 6th of May will determine who will be Scotland's government, who will be Scotland's First Minister and who will be our MSP. A year ago, we had to act fast without the knowledge about the coronavirus and without the benefit of hindsight we have today. We didn't get everything right. And I think it's fair to say that. We've not yet defeated COVID, but the plan is working. We're getting there. It's because of your work and the sacrifices of people across East Lothian and Scotland that we're managing to get there. I want a Scotland founded on compassion and love, where we look after for one another in a spirit of solidarity. Our manifesto will show a vision for transformational change on social care. In the term of the next Parliament, once we recover from COVID, the SNP will establish a national care service, and I'll touch on that a little bit later on. It'll improve standards, ensure enhanced pay and conditions for workers, and provide better support for unpaid carers. It'll also allow us to introduce a national care wage for care staff, to whom we owe so much, and enter into national pay bargaining for the sector for the first time. So it'll be a major change and it will require major investment. This is why we want to increase public investment into social care by 25% over the course of the next Parliament, which will deliver £800 million of additional support. There's also, and we believe that social care, just like healthcare, should be provided on a truly universal basis, free to point of use, where we will remove charges for non-residential care. The SNP are also pledging a transformational change in increase in frontline health spending. So over the next Parliament, we will increase frontline NHS spending by at least 20%, which equates to £2.5 billion. I'm asking you to vote SNP to elect me as your MSP and Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister, so we can provide the leadership required to guide Scotland through and out of this pandemic. I'm asking you to vote for SNP for a bold and transformational programme for carers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. So we'll move to hear from Craig Hoy next, please.
Thank you, Jess, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Carers of East Lothian for organising tonight's hustings, and to thank the carers and families of carers for not only taking the time to attend tonight, but for everything they've done, particularly over the last 12 months during the COVID pandemic. For me, this is one of the most important and hopefully the most interesting hustings that we've all been asked to attend, because normally we turn up with a pre-prepared script about why you should vote for us, and we talk and you're expected to listen. Tonight, I'd like it to be the other way around, because you are the people who are on the front line, and I'd like to learn from you so that whoever is the next MSP can fully understand the issues that you face on a daily basis. And while I'm sure I will do some of that talking, I think we really do welcome the opportunity to try and discuss those emotional, practical and financial issues that I'm sure all of us, myself as a councillor, have been aware of that carers face, but that have become potentially much more severe and acute during the COVID pandemic. Carers are the real backbone of our social care system, yet you are not recognised nearly enough. And can I just thank you again for the important role that you play, and also recognise the hardship that it brings to many carers as well. During COVID, the closure of community facilities and respite care has put a huge strain on carers, many of whom have already made huge sacrifices, particularly in relation to their own health, their own well-being and their own finances in order to look after the cared for person. Last year, 3/4 of unpaid carers had to provide more care for their loved ones during the pandemic, and many more people became carers perhaps for the first time. And it's clear that there's a huge amount more that we can do and that we should do to support you in your role. My party, the Scottish Conservatives, want to make sure that Scotland's carers are properly looked after, and that's why we will introduce a package of practical support, and I look forward to exploring some of these support mechanisms this evening. I look forward to your questions, to your views and to your observations about how we can work together to improve the experience and quality of life for carers here in East Lothian. And thank you again for inviting me this evening.
Many thanks, Craig. So we'll hear from Martin Whitfield next, please. Martin.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And again, thank you for the invite tonight, and also the opportunity to listen to a part of society that, quite frankly, haven't been listened to enough. I'm standing on behalf of the Scottish Labour Party, and my background was, for 2 years, I was the MP here in East Lothian, where I did a lot of work with carers, both paid and unpaid, but also before that as a class teacher, where I had the great privilege to teach a significant number of young people who were also carers. And although not strictly speaking within the remit of your organisation, I do hope we have an opportunity to discuss the quite phenomenal work that our young people do. And that also reflects, of course, to adult carers. It is an area of society that, quite frankly, has been neglected. We know that. And I think it was interesting in your opening to talk about seeking a carers champion, because I think it is about time the carers had a voice, and a very strong voice, to speak up for them, to speak up for what was right, what has gone wrong, and also to speak up and push the doors open to allow carers to be in the meetings where decisions are taken. It's all very well for people who have no experience of care to come along and say what they think is right and wrong, but actually the people who know how the service needs to change, how their lives need to be made better, are the people who are at this hustings. And they should be in the meetings contributing their ideas, their experiences. And if I have the privilege of representing East Lothian as their MSP, then that's certainly something I will demand and force. Interestingly, I have discovered as MP that politicians don't have very much money themselves, but it is amazing what doors that they can push open. It is amazing what people they can get their constituents in front of. And I think of the work that I did with Grace over her Any Disability sign and the changes that have come about it. And I would lead with a passion to push doors open to allow carers to come in. So I look forward to the discussion tonight and answering, I hope, very detailed questions. And thank you again for the invite.
Many thanks, Martin. And finally, we'll hear from Euan Davidson, please.
Hi there, my name's Euan Davidson. I'm the Scottish Liberal Democrat candidate. About my background, I grew up just over the county line in Midlothian. I currently work as a caseworker for an MP, so dealing with a big range of issues. But last year I qualified as a social worker. So my background's in children's social care, and previously worked as a carer for adults with learning disabilities as well. So that's really pleased to get an invite to this Hustings, because this is an issue I care about a lot. So my party's kind of vision for carers in this election, our UK leader is an unpaid carer, cares for his disabled son. So we've launched a Stand Up for Carers campaign across the UK to push for an increase of £1,000 a year for carers allowance. We also want to see a scrapping of at-home care charges. Additionally, we want to see national standards for care, and I think it's really important that those are led by service users and by carers rather than by bureaucrats and professionals, frankly. I think we also want to see a right to respite care, and a step change in the way we recognise the workforce, fair work standards for all carers, including unpaid carers, and a proper career structure for paid carers that we see in other professions. So look forward to the question.
Lovely, thanks, Euan. Thank you. Bear with us just a moment. I'm awaiting Kirstin jumping in to do something. I think that's right. She'll tell me if not.
Yes, that's right. I was trying to see if I could spotlight myself as well, so that I would appear on screen. Hopefully everyone can hear me. We're going to go on to the questions that have been submitted in advance. We had many questions around carer support, and so we shall start with, what will you do to improve support for unpaid carers if you're the next MSP for East Lothian? And can we start with Martin for Labour, please?
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for whoever submitted the question, because I think this immediately goes to the heart of what's so important about this Hustings tonight, but about carers. It is about the support that society should give people who are undertaking, more often than not, in fact, almost exclusively because of the love and affection for an individual, the care that would otherwise fall to somebody else. And they want to do it because they are family, they are friends, they are kith and kin. And the pressure that they are put under because of the lack of support from the rest of society around that is frankly intolerable. It is good that here in Scotland, we're starting to talk about a national care service. It is good that here in Scotland, we're starting to talk about the support that unpaid carers need. It comes, as indeed Euan has said, about the need for respite care, because everybody needs some own headspace so that they can continue to be the person that they are. And Scottish Labour, following the independent review of adult social care, fully supports the proposals that are contained in there. The social care manifesto that has come out, they fully support that. But what will I do? I go back to my opening comments. It is about being a strong voice for people and demanding that they're listened to and heard. So what small payments are received shouldn't fall to affect people's universal credit and things like that. There needs to be respite care. There needs to be support. There needs to be access to professionals, both for the person who is being cared for, but also for the carer. And I look at some of the challenging situations that have occurred with young people, where a lot of people will sit around a table and say, we know what the problem is, but there's this, that, and the other means we can't do it. As an MSP, I would make sure that door was open for the carer to be there, and I would demand that the carer is listened to, hopefully and properly, while the whole structure is being created, but specifically when they have individual problems, to make sure that we can seek resolution, because we owe our carers so much, and they deserve the similar sort of championing that others have, because so far they have been, unfortunately, an unlistened to voice. But an excellent question, thank you.
And can I ask Paul to respond next? Paul for SNP.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I think we all recognise the work that the carers do, and I don't think you're going to hear any argument about that. I think there are a few key things. I think for me, and speaking to various carers, I think one of the first things we need to do is a proper needs analysis in East Lothian. What exactly is the care that we require? And I know the council have been talking about that for a number of years, and that's something I really want the council to quicken up, because we really need to understand about what's the level of care that's out there, particularly after the pandemic. And Martin mentioned about respite, which is very important. So I think one of the first things, obviously, is to make sure that the council administration undertake that needs analysis, and we know exactly what we need to deal with. And that's obviously going to be important in speaking to carers. One of the things I think it's really important in speaking to individuals and the carers over a number of years is advocacy. So I think being your MSP, being an advocate, is a really important thing, dealing with both the council and issues within Scottish Government. One of the things I want to propose on the back of this as your MSP would be a carers assembly. So it's pledging to meet with the carers on an annual basis, and obviously individuals or groups more than that. I think that's really, really important. So I'm aware of the issues that the carers are facing on a year-to-year basis, and have that as a formal process in that regard. And I mentioned obviously around about needs analysis. One of the issues that we'll all need to face and look at is obviously is mental health review of services that are offered as well. Because I think in looking at the manifesto which came out for the unpaid carers and young carers, that was one of the key things it was talking about, and there's additional investment needed in that. And again, I think the other thing for me is there are unpaid carers, and many have to look at how they work with employment around about that. And again, one of the key issues that came through with the manifesto from the unpaid carers was looking at about an employability strategy around about that. How can we be flexible around about people who care but also have to work? And I think there needs to be a strategy worked out with yourselves around about that, about how we can try and get people who can work with flexible working, and a strategy around about that as well, to make sure that they can look after the carers as well. But the biggest thing, and I'll agree with Martin on this, we need to be the biggest advocates for the service that you guys offer in East Lothian, and I think that's one of the key things. But they're the key things I think for me in that regard.
Thank you, Paul. And can I invite Craig from the Conservatives next?
Thanks. I think one of the things that you should hope for your MSP, and I certainly would be, it's what I've done as a councillor, is that somebody who you can call, not necessarily just with a problem, but just for a thought or a bit of support. And it struck me in the early days of the lockdown that a couple I got to know, and she's the husband's carer, and I got to know him through one of the community meal facilities in East Lothian, and she was having a real problem because every door had been closed in her face, because her husband, who has dementia, couldn't understand the need to stay home. And despite the fact that we saw it on television, and it was being repeated daily, many times in the course of the day, to him by his wife, as a non-forced to shield group, those with dementia, she simply couldn't get a medical letter, she couldn't get anything to say to stay at home. So she asked me if I would just simply write him a letter as somebody that he knew, and something with my photograph on it, and thankfully I've got a lot of that in the office, just repeating what the government's advice was, that there was a lady on the television who we should all follow, and she showed him that 5 or 6 times a day, and it was a form of external validation of what it was that she'd been trying to say. And to me, those are the sort of simple things that politicians should do, is to try and short circuit things, to make sure that they go out of their way to try and help people in one small but significant way. But in terms of what we can do more collectively, I think looking at how we fund organisations such as yours more, and making sure that awareness levels that carers in East Lothian have people that they can turn to. I think that is one of the things. There's been obviously a lot more new carers have come through during COVID. So it's us acting really as an ambassador for functions such as yours. At a national level, obviously, all parties that come forward with, I think in some respects, similar commitments. We've obviously looked that we would want to taper the carers allowance so that if you do hit that income threshold, that suddenly you don't receive no payment, that the payment is tapered off if you earn more. Looking at extending the carers allowance after bereavement, or the bereavement of the person that you care for, from 2 months to 6 months, and I'm also expanding the carers allowance to those who are in full-time education, because as Martin referred to earlier, many children and young people are, if not the principal carer, then certainly one of the key carers within their family or within a support base, including friends. So I think there's a lot more you should expect from your MSP to do, not necessarily at a national or a policy level, but it's about being a community champion for carers. It's about making sure that our door is always open, even if other doors are closed. And it's also about looking how we can leverage in monies so that organisations that are at the front line can be better supported. Because I think one of the things that we forget is that, and this has been, I think, in a sense, a failure of governments of all parties, at the council level and national level. What carers do is effectively, we have outsourced a huge amount of the social care framework of this country to people who are doing it because of compassion for friends and family. And you need people who recognise that there's only so much we can ask you to do, or only so much that you should be expected to do. So it's to have advocates for you to go back to government and say, actually, we need to provide more support, and we need to do it because whilst this group are more than willing to do it, we recognise that it brings huge strains, and we can't keep asking people to do that, where otherwise the state would be expected to intervene.
Thank you, Craig. Can I now invite Euan from Liberal Democrats to respond?
I think one of the most important things we can do is a right to respite care and a right to a minimum amount of respite. One of the big problems with respite care currently is that because there's no right, the services are often cut. They're one of the first things that are reduced when budgets are tight, and I think a right to a minimum amount of respite care would help solve that and would give reliable and consistent care respite availability. I think as well, Paul's point about the needs analysis was really important. I think the situation has changed so drastically over the last year that we need to take stock and recognise that service provision that was appropriate a year ago is probably not useful in the current situation. I think the point in mental health provision is really interesting as well. It's a big priority for me personally, for my party. We want to guarantee 15% of the NHS budget to mental health care and increase access to community services. And I think that's really crucial in trying to strike that balance between care and responsibilities and well-being and self-care for carers as well. And I think as the financial aspect's also really important. We need to reform the social security system. It's broken completely. So as I've said already, we'd back £1,000 a year extra for carers allowance, but we also want to see trials for a universal basic income, so that everybody is guaranteed support, and that I think that's a massive thing for unpaid carers. Some financial security so that you're not having to constantly worry about the financial aspect of things. On a personal level, I think the best thing that you can have for unpaid carers is people experience in the system. I've dedicated most of my professional life so far in social care in one form or another, and I would love to be your voice.
Thank you, Euan. I'm delighted to say the next question we have is from Agnes, who's on the call here with us. Agnes, I'm going to spotlight you and invite you to unmute yourself and ask your question. Agnes, I think you're still on mute, so please unmute to ask your question.
My name is Agnes Stevenson. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Agnes.
Many 24/7 unpaid carers suffer mental and physical problems. They have difficulty accessing support services to go for treatment. These carers are torn between attending to their loved ones or their own health suffer. There's a lot of these carers who have no family or their family do not live near them. They need a sitting service, which has never been mentioned, to just go to the doctors for an appointment or go to a hospital. I have been in this situation that I had to cancel an appointment twice at the hospital in Edinburgh. And because I had cancelled twice, I got a letter to say they were going to take me off the list. Now, to me, that was intolerable because I suffered over that, because it meant it was me or my husband, and my husband had to come first. Unfortunately, my husband died. But like these carers, I was in the house for 5 months without getting outside the door because there was no service for me. And I would like for the new Parliament, whoever it is, to think very, very carefully about these carers and all carers, whether they're young people and old people. We need help out here. Not just talk, we need help.
Thank you, Agnes. And I think one of the things you were raising there was about how will the next MSP support the health and well-being of carers so that they're not sacrificing their own health for the sake of their loved ones.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can I thank you so much, Agnes? Can I invite Paul from the SNP to respond in the first instance?
Yeah, Agnes, thanks for that, and thanks for your question. It's obviously an issue that's affected you deeply, and I'm sorry to hear that. I think the key thing, I think, for me, and it comes down to is, and again, this comes back to the needs analysis. Now, I'm not sure whether we know enough around about what's going on in East Lothian to make sure that when we're procuring services, that we know that the services we're asking for are going to provide the care that you ask for. And I think that's going to be really important, because and you shouldn't have to be in the position that you're having to either choose between a medical appointment or your own health. And I think one of the key things is we need to find out, how many people like yourself are having this issue in East Lothian. And I'm not sure Jess, yourself or Kirsten would know that. And I think that's the work that the council would need to do. And I think I would work closely with the council to establish, when we're procuring services, what exactly is it the services that we require. And one of the key things I think that's came out of that for me is, one of the key things that's come out about the review, the field review, is talking about a human rights-based approach, and that has to be at the centre of what we're doing. It's not just about the people who require the care; it's about the carers themselves. And I think one of the key things is looking at that and establishing that needs analysis first to find out exactly how many people like yourself, Agnes, are like that. Because when the council procure that, there has to be some kind of service that we can offer to yourself because of that. Because it's almost investing in your health, because the last thing we want as well is that your health suffers, and then somebody else has to then look after yourself. So there needs to be, the key thing I think for me, as I said, is the needs analysis to understand around about what services we need to procure. We then and my role, I think, would be then going to speak to government and saying, look, we need to fund that, if that's the case, through the council, and speaking to the council and saying we need to fund these services. But we need to know how many people like yourself are out there, and this again comes back to the needs analysis and about what we need to do. So we need to identify it. We need to review about what needs to be done to sort that, and we need to make sure that your health doesn't suffer because of that. But I would certainly know that's the key thing I think for me is working on your behalf to make sure that service is available, as well as the respite we've talked about, as well as mental health provision that we've talked about as well.
Thank you, Paul. Can I invite Euan from Liberal Democrats to respond?
Thanks for the question, Agnes. That experience is horrendous, and it's just not good enough, and it's far, far too common. I think your experience shows we need all services to be designed and led by service users and carers. The problem is, for too long, it's been top down, and we don't listen to what carers need. So, yeah, and I think going back to the respite issue, I think part of the problem with the sort of patchwork services we've got just now is they're just not flexible. You're given a night here or a night there, and it's not necessarily what you need at the time. So I think I would like to say, well, a right to respite care, that should be as flexible as we can make it. And I think as well that the point on sort of health services, as I talked about already, mental health's a big priority for me, and I think we need to see, what we want to see is much more professionals based in the community rather than necessarily in healthcare settings. So you could access mental health support in your local area rather than having to go elsewhere. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing though is that we need to listen to what you need rather than what the bureaucrats tell you need.
Thank you, Euan. Craig, for the Conservatives, can I invite you to respond next, please?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Agnes. And I'm terribly sorry to hear about your experience and also the passing of your husband. I think what your experience talks to, and what the experience of others that have come to me talks to, is that the services are too fractured, and that process means there are too many cracks that carers fall through. And as a result of that, then I think, as you experience, you're then fearful about attending a hospital appointment because you're not able to get, and I think your suggestion of a sitting service, it seems so simple. Why couldn't there be something on your medical file at your GP that then activates something that then you find that when a hospital appointment comes, there's something there to say that they can provide that service? And it seems so simple, and yet I think this is part of the shortcomings of the structures that we have, is that they're not joined up and they're not connected. And I think the broader point, I'm not surprised, but I am shocked and I think saddened at the same time when I read the statistics about how many carers put the health and the well-being of the person they care for before their own health and well-being, be that physical or mental. And again, I think that's something where we need to make sure that the services and the facilities are put in place so that you don't have to make a decision between the health of the person you're caring for and your own personal health. So I think there's obviously work that could be done through the IGB at the local level in relation to that. That's something where the council and the health board, I think, should really be working far closer. And I would hope that organisations such as Carers of East Lothian could come into that process to act somehow as a catalyst to say, look, here's one example. Because what you tend to find is if there's one example of this happening, there's many, many more. And I think, Agnes, the fact that you raised your hand and identified your experience there should probably mean that out of this conversation, this meeting, we should all now have a takeaway to say something as simple as a sitting service for those who can't, and particularly in COVID, those who can't chap on the door of a neighbour or a friend or a family member to attend, because the cost of lost operations lost appointments are huge to the health service. So it's not as though this is a money or resource thing. This is the inability to put the systems in place to sort out this problem. So hopefully, I think all of us will take away your experience and try and learn lessons from that and see what can be done, even if it's just within East Lothian, because obviously the council could be working through the IGB to look at how we could do more to try and resolve issues such as that. But thank you very much for your experience.
Sorry, thank you, Craig. And Martin for Labour, please.
Thank you. And again, like everyone else tonight, thank you, Agnes, for sharing that, because it is important that it's heard. And it's important because you are the people who know the answers to the problems that you face. And as Craig has said, something as simple as a sitting service. It means that the policies have to be properly funded. It means that people have to stand up and fight for carers so that they are properly recognised in the same way as veterans who are rightly, properly recognised, to those who serve in our emergency services, because the whole of society has and will continue to rely upon carers. And it is right that those who care should also be cared for. And so what's going to be done? I think the reality is that we need to properly listen to people when services are designed, to make sure there is something as simple as a phone number that you have. And I will shout for that. I very much will shout for that, because it is enormously important that the whole of society recognises its responsibility to carers, the way carers accept their responsibility to those that they care for. And I think, as I said right at the outset, you have the answers, and they are frequently very straightforward and would be enormously helpful. And I think it's right that politicians listen to that. But more importantly, not just listen to it, act on it, so that the next time that situation comes along, you don't have to make that choice. Mention was made earlier of human rights. And, you know, I spend many hours telling children about their rights at school and saying it's very important. And similarly, I would say for carers, their human rights are very important because they are enforceable. And as a society, we've accepted that those human rights should be responsible. You now need to see the reality day to day so that your life can be made easier. And I would be a voice for that. But thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Martin. And our next question that was submitted was around respite. And in the comments, we've had some comments from Jacqueline asking about the right to respite and how it will be funded. So I will just put Jacqueline on screen now to ask her question.
Thank you. It's that in a past life, I was a hospital social worker and a community social worker. So had experience of trying to get respite for people. Very much, I think that there should be a legal right for people to have respite, whether that be a sitter service. Overnight care is a particular difficulty, access to a week off, you know, all sorts of the different sorts of respites. As a social worker, we were often told people had a right to be assessed, but not necessarily a right to the service. So it's a question about how we fund all aspects of this, whether it be the funding of the staff to do the assessments, that when I was working in the hospital, I was being told that the carer's needs assessment could wait till the person was home, because to do a carer's needs assessment would delay the bed blocker from discharge. That then there is the actual funding for the respite service for the person. So that might be either direct by the councils or by, self-directed support. And then there's the actual funding of the availability. It's all very well saying, oh, you're entitled to a week's respite, but if there's nobody actually got the funding for the week's respite, or particularly with sitter services, there used to be a good organisation called Crossroads, and then that just disappeared. And you know that so many services depend on actually getting the funding. And it, as I think it was Euan said, soft target for cuts is the organisations that look for to provide the services. So, I am concerned that any reorganisation that's coming with setting up National Care Service, how will voluntary organisations fit into that? And will funding just go by the board whilst reorganisation is happening, because it's not certain who's going to be funding the new services? And that's already come up with some of the things like the reorganisation of health and social care in East Lothian, because it's a case of, well, we might not be providing that. So it's the whole thing of, okay, right to respite, but how do we fund all aspects of it?
Thank you for that, Jackie. Can I ask Craig from the Conservatives to respond, please?
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Jackie. I think whilst we've been broadly, and I've been broadly supportive of the Feely review, I think one of the issues that we have to be very careful about is where we're taking from the local and moving to a national, that we do not lose some of the really good things we have. And I think one of the issues about social care provision in East Lothian is quite a lot of it is provided by charities and third sector groups. And I have a concern that during that process of reorganisation, even if the end aim and objective is for there to be a mixed economy, you know, of state, private, and third and charitable sector provision here in East Lothian, our unusually high dependence upon that could mean that we lose that people-centred approach that allows us to achieve perhaps greater results, particularly in relation to areas such as respite care here in East Lothian that we may see elsewhere in the country. So I think if we are going to move forward with sort of national social care structures and systems, then I think we have to embed that localism, and we have to ensure that the third sector is given a key role where it exists, or where we can potentially grow it. I mean, take Mookie House here in East Lothian. We're talking about world-class respite care on our doorstep. I think the issues that you've identified in relation to the IGB are also quite interesting. I mean, I have a concern about IGBs in the sense that I think the fact that you've got more than one local authority and then one health board does create sort of some stresses and strains there, and it's not necessarily the best way of delivering social care. But clearly what I wouldn't want to do is to throw the baby out with the bathwater there. I think in relation to respite care, I think also there is a real need as we come out of COVID to make sure that as respite facilities can be opened up, they're opened up as quickly as is possible. And I'll definitely be advocating strongly for that. In terms of commitments we've made nationally, in addition to saying we'll obviously look at the city review and support, where possible, the creation of a national care service, I think it's important to say that I think it's £600 million we're bringing forward to kickstart NHS services again. And I think respite services, I think, should be one of those priority areas. And then there's an additional £2 billion over the lifetime of the next Parliament in NHS funding. And I'd like to see respite services getting at least their fair share of that. Because I think we've, as I said earlier, we've outsourced what should in certain respects be state operated and state delivered, or charitable sector and third sector delivered facilities and services because of the goodwill of carers. And I don't think we should be relying on that moving forward to the same extent.
Thank you, Craig. Can I invite Euan from the Liberal Democrats to respond next?
Yeah, so we've committed to 35 billion extra for the whole sector across the UK. So that funding would trickle down to a significant increase for social care across Scotland. So I think that would help fund the right to respite that you've talked about. Talking about the National Care Service, I've got quite significant concerns about the proposal for National Care Service. Previous Scottish Government centralisations like Police Scotland have resulted in services being taken out of local communities and funding taken out of local communities. And I would have serious concerns that the same thing would happen with a National Care Service. But I think the most fundamental thing is if we can build in a right to respite and a right to minimum provision of care, then that has to be paid for. Then it can't be cut. That if there's a right to care, it needs to be paid for. And frankly, I don't think we can afford not to do this. We can't afford not to give that right. We heard from the previous question some of the costs associated with not providing proper respite and proper support for carers, and I don't think it's a choice we can make not to pay for them.
Thank you, Euan. Can I invite Martin for Labour next, please?
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Jackie, and you're dead right. You know from your experience, and I think probably everyone on this call knows, that unless it's phrased properly, the money pinchers will find a way to avoid it. So when respite is written into law, it needs to be written into law properly so that not just the right to be assessed for the need for respite is there, but that you can actually have the respite and the provision is there. And the provision needs to reflect the very differences that there are amongst carers. And again, to go back to listening to you as the carers know the format, the style, the length, and frankly, the locations of respite that would work. And you need to be listened to. And that then needs to be protected. It needs to be a fundamental part of what community society offers to carers, that they can take a break, because that's a good thing for mental health, for physical health, and for all parties involved. And it's about you being involved in that. So it is about how it's drafted. And I think, if politicians can do one thing apart from listen to lots of people and do far too much talking, when that legislation is going through, we earn our money by making sure it's phrased properly so that you don't have a right that actually becomes unenforceable or is ignored, which unfortunately is frequently the case across a lot of different aspects, as you've rightly pointed out. And with regard to the move to a national service, I think it's very important that happens. But similarly, it is crucial that in the intervening periods that lie over, people don't abdicate their responsibilities, and they mustn't be allowed to do that. It is frequently the case that I think that some people, again, I'm going to be very cruel to the pen pushers, use the opportunities to cut back and make savings when actually the investment should go right up to the handover. And I think, again, it's important, as the new service is designed and rolled out, fed into by carers, fed into by those people who they do care for, that actually provision is made to ensure the service, as we approach the handover date, is the true quality of service that we want going into a national service. And I think it can be achieved, but it requires people to hold others to account. And if they're not doing their job properly, point them out and show to carers, this is the person who's let you down. It was an excellent question. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And Paul for the SNP.
Yeah, Jackie, thanks for the question. You and I have had chats around about this at the local Dunbar subgroup. Few things I think for me. I think one of the key things around about the Feely review is its recommendations have been supported fully by the National Carers Organisation, and obviously that's mentioned in their manifesto that they've sent. But one of the key things I think it says in the Feely review, and it's under unpaid carers, is carers should be given a right to respite with an amendment to the Carers Act as required. That needs to be done, and I think that's certainly something I would push for if I'm elected as soon as possible, because there needs to be that right in that regard. In terms to the actual National Care Service, I welcome it. I think localism and how services should be delivered, it's not what the National Care Service is there to do. I think it's there to improve standards, look at enhanced pay and look at terms and conditions and so on, and obviously move towards a national carers wage. And I think that's a really important thing, that services have to be developed locally. One of the other things, and I think this is really important, and it's mentioned again in the manifesto for unpaid carers, and this is a really important thing, a national programme for improving carers' health and wellbeing should be developed with sufficient funding from NHS boards, health and social care partnerships. And again, it comes back, and I'm sorry I keep on going on about it, what do we actually need in East Lothian in terms of respite? And what's the figure that needs to be fed into council budgets, into national budgets as well? And we can develop a programme, it's a national programme, but we can do it on a local basis around about what kind of services that are required out there. And it mentions, as I said, about carers' health and wellbeing. Other things we can look at quite simply as well is that carers, for example, access to some of the services the council offers. And I know it might not be a case, but if it's a case of someone looking at health issues, can we, for example, engage with Enjoy about getting free services for carers? Not just people who need cared for, but actual services for carers. There might be more than that we can look at as well, and I think that's really important. But I welcome, just in summary, I welcome the National Care Service. I think that it's still going to be services that are going to be localised. We need to get that right to respite in the Carers Act as soon as possible. But we need to develop a national programme and a local programme to see how we can support that, ensuring that we're listening to what carers are saying. And I think, again, it comes back to the proposal I made earlier on around about a carers assembly. I would want to discuss issues with that, as I said, on an annual basis. So I'm hearing, if we do introduce the National Care Service, how would that go down after the first year? What does the council need to do? What do I need to do as an MSP? And what does the Scottish Government need to do as well? But it's a really, really good question. I think it's something that we all need to do better in Scotland, and recognise respite as a really, really important part, not just for whoever needs care, but the carers themselves and their health. And it comes back to the question I think Agnes mentioned about her health and about other carers' health as well, because, you know, if we invest in these services, that will help other people's health, carers' health.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Jackie, for your question. Our next question comes from Helen. So Helen, please unmute yourself and I will ping you.
Hello, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Helen.
Great. Yeah, my question moves on really. The other questions of, you've had the opportunity to tell us how your parties and you yourselves would advocate for some of the issues that have been highlighted in the Feely review and also in the introduction from Jess just now from the Carers of East Lothian from the local perspective. So you've been speaking about things like the right to respite, putting things in practice and supporting other services. My question is turning a little bit more the focus onto recognizing what the contribution that unpaid carers and often 24/7 carers make, the saving, the in-kind contribution that they are making for the people of Scotland. And yet, very often, they are being forced into poverty as a result of taking on their caring role. Some of you have mentioned across, as you've been answering, some of the things that you would like to see. My question is really, can you please tell us from your party plans what specific measures your party are going to take for reforming the carers allowance so that unpaid carers do not fall into poverty as a result of having to take on or wanting to take on the role of unpaid carers because of the failure of the system. Some of those failures we know well, but just to mention a couple, the earnings gap, the cliff edge, if you're taking on, you know, your restrictions in eligibility that come up. For instance, if you're in receipt of other support, the earnings cap is still very, very low. So I won't go on, but please would you tell us not what you yourself think, but what specific commitments do your parties make in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And can I invite Martin for Labour to respond first?
Excellent. Thank you, Helen. And again, as they all have been, an excellent question. I will answer your question. I'll do a typical politician's thing, but I just want to point out something else, which I think carers have a huge input in towards. That's not just the economy. They are frequently the absolute specialists in those people that they care for, and they should have a right. They should have almost an expectation that they can take part in the health planning for the person that they care for and for themselves, because I find too frequently their knowledge is overlooked, and actually that's a very foolish and short-term thing to do. So I just put that in first. Turning now to the economic side of it, and first of all, it's appalling to try and assess anyone in their economic contribution, because I think what carers do is offer an enormous emotional, spiritual and economic contribution to society. As a group of individuals, they are a font of knowledge in an area that there are not enough experts in, and politicians certainly aren't that. But coming straight to the economic side of it, there is an assurance from Scottish Labour of supporting the Feeler outcome, of also supporting the manifesto, which means aligning thresholds with regard to a living wage, because we must prevent people firstly going into poverty during that time that they're caring, but also becoming trapped in poverty at the end of the time that their period of caring has taken place, because too often carers can't recover from that period because of loss of support through lack of employment, things like that. So there are a lot of assurances. Our manifesto is being published tomorrow. You can see the extracts from snippets of the existing manifestos, including the Women's Manifesto that was published today, which talks about that significant contribution that's made and the support that should go to female carers. But I can assure you that raising people out of poverty, keeping people out of poverty, is a crucial part of the economic recovery that we need to see here in Scotland, and indeed across the United Kingdom, and indeed across Europe for it. So I know time's tight, but I would draw you to the manifesto. There we are. I'll put an advert in for tomorrow, but thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Can I invite Paul from SNP to respond?
Yeah, thank you for that. And Helen, another fantastic question. I think there are a few things that to come in, and I think Martin touched on it about the process itself and then take the input of carers. And I think the first thing I talked about the Carers Assembly, one of the key things I think again is making sure carers are involved in the budget process when the council sets its budget, to make sure if we're offering services that you have your input into that. Euan touched earlier on about the social security aspect of this, and it's ridiculous, you know, if there is an increase, for example, the SNP is looking to replace the carers allowance with a carers assistance, what they call a carers assistance plan. Now, and again, looking to increase that by £10 per week for people who have got more than one disabled person. And there's also the assistance as well if, for example, you lose someone, normally that care goes on for 8 weeks. The SNP are looking to provide that for another 12 weeks. And I think that's something that's going to be there, really important. One of the key things, and it's about the service-free point of care, and I think I talked around about the moving charges for non-residential care, and I think that's going to be a fundamental change in that regard. And I think, you know, again, one of the key things, and we've all touched on this, and I think it's supported right across the Parliament, is a national minimum income guarantee. And I know the things the SNP are doing is obviously looking to pilot that, and I think that's something that would make a massive difference in that regard. You know, if we can look at what level that income needs to be, and people have a minimum income guarantee, I think that's really, really important. So the package, as I said, of the carers assistance, of looking about the removing residential charges, and also the national minimum guarantee, I think would be really important going forward. So quite an extensive package, recognising the work that carers do.
Thank you, Paul. Can I invite Euan for Liberal Democrats next?
Thanks for the question, Helen. It's a really good question. I think the reality is nobody should be in poverty, but especially carers who've sacrificed so much for our communities and their families. So we recognise that the safety net's broken in our society, and we need a universal basic income where you'd be guaranteed minimum income. We also want to see, as I've said already, an increase in the carers allowance by £1,000 a year. That's one of our big priorities. I think one of the things we've not touched on is a large amount of benefits have been transferred to Holyrood and I think it's 2024. So I think in the run up to that transfer, of a lot of the benefits are coming directly affect carers, and I think it's really important that in the run up to that we listen to carers, and when we're restructuring those benefits, that there's certainly no loss to carers, but that we prioritise increasing unpaid carers' income.
Thank you, Euan. And finally, Craig for the Conservatives, please.
Thanks, Helen. And another good question. I think I alluded earlier to the commitments in relation to the carers allowance, obviously making sure that we have that taper. So if you do earn £1 over £120 a week, that you don't lose the carers allowance entirely. And I just think that's a common sense thing to do. I think extending the allowance after bereavement from 2 months to 6 months, I think again is also important. I think extending it to those who are in full-time education, I think obviously means that we are extending the scope of it there. But also I think there's more we can do practically to provide employment opportunities and employment guidance, and making the employment market more flexible, so that if we can, if those who are looking after someone of those who are a carer can work and want to work, that perhaps would make it easier for them to go into work. The issue of a minimum income guarantee, I've looked at this over a number of years, and there are very strong arguments in favour and there are arguments against. Perhaps a different, we can have that debate at a different time. I think the one thing we can say now is that we can see devolution working over the next 3 to 4 years. In fact, we should have seen it 5 or 6 years ago, because so many of the welfare powers that used to be at Westminster are now in the control of the Scottish Parliament. And the SNP, for whatever reason, structurally couldn't bring them over into Social Security Scotland. But we have the power now to set up a new social security system in Scotland that is specifically targeted towards the needs of Scottish society. So that's obviously what we're proposing to do now. But I think as Holyrood takes over more and more welfare powers, I think it's inevitable and desirable that we start to look at how we can reform welfare to make it more specific for the needs of those who are most in need. And I do hope that those powers that are meant to be transferring from Westminster to Holyrood come up as quickly as possible, and there's no further delays, Paul, so that we can actually start to debate what kind of welfare system we want here in Scotland.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Helen, for the question. We did have further questions that unfortunately time has run away with us. I'm going to invite Jess back in now to round up.
Thanks, Kirstine. So we are slightly over for time. I think we are still just going to invite everybody to do a quick summing up, or if there's any other points you'd like to make from any of the candidates. So I'll ask you all to do that just short and sweet if you can. I'm sure you can. So we'll start with Euan Davidson of the Liberal Democrats, please.
I'll keep it as quick as I can. I think we need to see a completely different approach to caring in this country. We've heard how valuable it is to their communities, their economy, their health service. And I think the most important thing for me is that we listen to carers, we listen to service users. And as we go forward, whether it's a national care service or whether it's a different approach, it needs to be led by the people it affects, not by politicians or end pushers. So yeah, thank you. It's been really interesting.
Thanks, Euan. And now Martin Whitfield from Labour, please.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And it has been a very uplifting evening with some challenging questions, but it is important that carers are listened to. And I think rather than go back over what I've said, I would just like to return to that one point that I think sits at the heart of what carers here in East Lothian need. You need a carers champion. And I would promise, assure and undertake to do that if I have the privilege of being your MSP, because as I said, as an MP, I found there are a lot of doors that you can kick open, and I think it's right to use that so that the people who have the experience, have the knowledge and have the ideas can sit at the table with the people who are making the decisions. And I think the expertise that you've seen in the people who are listening in at this Hustings and in the carers across East Lothian, that's who the people should be listening to, and you should have a genuine and proper input into it. So thank you very much for the invite tonight. And I hope it's made what is always a challenging decision for everyone when it comes to voting easier for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. And I'll invite Craig Hoy from the Conservatives now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks to everyone for the questions. I think we said that we would listen as much as we were talking, and I think we've all listened clearly tonight, and I probably more so than anyone would relish the prospect of being your champion. You don't ask for our support, but you deserve it. And I don't think you're doing this for our thanks and our respect, but certainly you have it. And if I was your MSP, I would be at the end of a telephone. I'd be willing to meet you whenever, wherever, to make sure that we can make your life better and to make sure that carers in East Lothian aren't forgotten about, don't fall through the cracks, and can find it a positive and rewarding experience, and to ensure that you know that others out there respect and are thankful for the work that you do on all our behalves. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Craig. And Paul McLennan from the SNP now, please.
Jess, thank you. Just one, I was going to say one suggestion. If there was more questions, I think we would all be happy if you want to email them to us. We'd be more than happy to get back to to the people who asked the question. If you want to do that, I'm sure my colleagues would be happy to do that. And again, passing on thanks to the organisers and the questions for tonight. And I think, you know, whoever you're going to elect, you're going to have a champion. You know, I think you've heard from the four of us, it's a really important part of being the job as an MSP. And whoever you elect, I'm sure you'll have a champion for that. Key things, I think, coming from me tonight, we have to continue to listen to what carers are telling us. And that's the most important thing. We have to be the advocate for the services that you require, not just nationally, but what you require locally. And that's working with Scottish Government, and it's working with the council in that regard. You need to be an integral part of decisions that are made. And I came back to the thing I said about a carers assembly, and you know, I'd like to get that set up if I was elected as soon as possible, and do that on an annual basis to make sure that I was there for yourself. You need to be part of budget processes as well. And that's part of Scottish Government and local budget processes as well. We need your input into that. National Care Service, I think that's really important, that the services and how that develops it needs to be looked at locally. What comes out of it locally? We need to localise these services as much as possible. And the needs analysis, as I said, and I'm sorry for going on about it, is something that we need to do as soon as possible. And I'd work in conjunction with the council in that regard. But just to say a massive thanks, Jess, to yourself and Kirsten around about that, but you know, the people who've asked the questions and people who obviously couldn't make it tonight because they'll be busy caring. The work that you do is fantastic. We all value it. You're a major part of keeping East Lothian ticking over. So a big thank you to everybody tonight.
Thanks, Paul, and thank you to everybody, and that's a nice reminder. Thank you. Obviously, we have been recording the session this evening, so many more people will be able to access the content from this evening. So thank you so much once again to all the candidates who have given their time and thoughts to us this evening so freely. I'm sure everyone will agree it's been a useful session, and I hope that everybody feels they have learnt something. Personally, I would like to say that I have really enjoyed and been impressed by the level of engagement with the serious issues that have come up tonight, and the clear level of care and passion that's been displayed this evening. And that is wonderful to see. So I particularly also like to thank our carers panel who've made the event this evening happen, with sterling support from my colleague Kirsteen, of course. So I don't need to wish you a safe journey home. So I shall just wish you well and say that I very, very much hope that you will all keep in touch with us. Thank you very much.